Good afternoon, everybody. It's Lachelle, America's Supermom. So glad to be in front of you guys yet again today.
Hello, this is Dr. Darleen Wodzenski with Orchard Human Services, and I'm really excited to talk with you about our upcoming training with Kevin.
So tell everybody a little bit about you, what you do, and everything.
Sure. Well, my name is Dr. Darleen Wodzenski, and I am a hodgepodge of things, all things that are required to care for children who are fragile, who have had a trauma history, who have some sort of genetic or epigenetic or neurodevelopmental challenge. And then we set them straight. There are times that we can absolutely correct something that's going on in a child's life, and then other times where, like a child with Down syndrome, I might not be able to fix that part, but we are going to work really hard to give that child the most excellent life possible, to get them as active and engaged and just full of life as they possibly can, and to use really effective strategies for documenting how we did it and what that child's interests are, so that they can have love and support for the rest of their lives, long after their parents are no longer walking the planet. And so that's what I do.
That is awesome. Now, so how did this journey start for you?
Well, it was a really interesting journey. My husband and I both started out thinking we were going to be in healthcare, and he is in healthcare. Before having children, we're both rather introspective folks, and I studied child development extensively. I studied T. Barry Brazelton, I studied Mr. Rogers. I mean, I just went into it head over heels. So by the time we had children, we were already married 10 years. So we moved to Georgia for my husband and me to go to grad school. And people start following us in public. They follow us out of restaurants. A lot of Head Start teachers came up to us and said, "Your children are extraordinary. How did you get them to do that?" And I'm thinking, what are these people talking about?
Right.
So we started, as our children got older and interacted with other children in the neighborhood, we'd have neighbors coming and calling or knocking on my door. One time I had one woman on my porch trying to get some help while another neighbor drove up. I didn't know this woman from Adam. So it came to pass that something was happening. And it wasn't what I intended. So I wound up searching my soul and became credentialed as a ministerial counselor. And I did that work for years. And then when my children were old enough, I went to grad school. And so I'm in a doctoral program, taking doctoral science courses, biochemistry, neurophysiology. I'm getting A's, but I'm tutoring my friends. I had quite a background in working with children and brain-based strategies. And my friends are passing, and the next thing I know, the university is offering me a position as a doctoral tutor for these courses. I did that for a few weeks, and I picked up my head, and my kids, it was amazing. My children went with me. This is so sweet. My husband was teaching on another campus of the university. He already had that doctoral degree. I'm a student, but I'm tutoring doctoral courses in this really beefy, deep science stuff, and my kids were there, and I had my little rolling bag and I had my little markers, and I'm writing on the board, and all of a sudden I turned around and looked at the students, and there was the one with epilepsy and the one with the brain infarction, the one with the non-specific learning disorder, and I'd helped them pass for the first time. And I went, I'm loving teaching, but I don't like this program so much. So I withdrew from that doctoral program, and I got my first master's in exceptional student education. So I thought, this is it. I'm going to do special ed. So then I'm teaching special ed, and I found out that children had developmental and mental health challenges that were far and above any of their learning problems. In most cases, if you can cure a child's developmental delay, or address their mental health issues, or take care of their trauma history so that they can help calm, which brings us into our topic today, of course, of mindfulness and metacognition. If you can help them self-regulate and calm, then all of a sudden they have extra resources to do better in school. So what did that mean? Another master's in clinical mental health counseling. So I do that one, and then I start working with really complex cases using a combined matrix strategy that I had designed that allowed me to address many issues at once. So then I had to go back and do a PhD in psychology, in a blended psychoneuroeducational psychology. And now the work that we do is so amazing that sometimes we get results in the first month, the first week, even the first day, for things that families and children have been getting therapy for years. And I can't always predict which person I can help. I can usually tell if I'm not the one for somebody, and I'll help them get a better referral. But quite often we do a really good job for the ones who are in our areas of specialization. And the two areas we probably do the most are attachment disorder and autism.
Mm-hmm.
Only because the
Oh.
things that help children with attachment disorders, so when I said we had all those children in our home, we had other
Mm-hmm.
children visit us and stay with us because they had lost a parent or they were in foster care and things weren't going well. They were returned to the family didn't know what to do, or there'd been a death in the family. All these circumstances put other people
Wow.
with problems in our home. And it just came to pass that the strategies that we learned to use to help those children also worked for people with neurodevelopmental disorders, and atypicality, like neuroatypicality. We refer to it autism spectrum disorder, but really that's like saying somebody has a cold. It can be any of a million things. So they
Right.
call it
Right.
autism, but autism really is just a category. It's not really a specific thing. But anyway, the work works for children who have that diagnosis as well.
That is awesome. So many people are commenting. They're saying, you're just an angel. The work that you do is such a gift. They want to thank you for what you're doing for the kids.
That is so sweet.
Now, so I can imagine, a lot of us have these limiting beliefs that kind of start when we are kids. So, does a lot of these different programs work on adults as well?
It's so funny that you asked that, because I started a nonprofit. First of all, I started a nonprofit called Orchard Human Services, because the concept is that a handful of seeds holds the promise of an entire orchard. But in my mind,
wow.
I felt like it was for the children. But it is
Mm-hmm.
you said exactly. I use the same strategies with adults, because so now if you look on my website, I say children of all ages. And so that
I
refers to
love
the
that.
fact that if someone had a problem, a limiting thought, a trauma, abuse, neglect happened to them in childhood, they're still carrying that around with them, but it's still a child's issue. And so the same strategies work. We just have to speak with that person at least part of the time like they're a grown-up, and then the rest of the time straight
Right.
up kitty therapy all the way, and it works.
Yeah, I can imagine, because, you think back and it's like when you have those traumatic times, maybe you were 7 or 8. And so you just get older with the same limiting belief and values. And, it doesn't change. How is it going to change if you don't know anything's broken
Right.
until you get older and realize that? So
Exactly.
that's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
So let's transition into our topic today. So you were saying we're talking about mindfulness. So how does that work for you in dealing with a lot of these different cases? It seems to me that'd be kind of heartfelt.
right. Well, the thing is, we each have our experience through ourselves. We have an experience in
Mm-hmm.
our body, and we have an experience in our mind. And even
Okay.
when we're having an experience in our body, our mind is still processing it for us. So people
Okay.
who are very reactive to the world, they get ticked
Mm-hmm.
off. That person at the checkout counter who is taking their time, or the driver. I mean, I actually almost cut somebody off today, and I know they were really sad at me. They were really mad at me. And I thought of waving, and I thought, well, if I wave, she's going to think I'm being snarky. I was just going to say sorry, because I think she was probably speeding, because I think I had time to pull out, but whatever. So when people get really reactive that way, they're using their
Mm-hmm.
mind in a way that's simply not serving them, right? And you
Right.
had an incredible opening where you were talking about focusing on what it is you want to create, of being very thoughtful and taking like an
Right.
inventory and being very responsible and having integrity about how you think.
Right.
But how do you teach somebody to do that if that wasn't their culture?
Right.
And
Right.
so the research is clear. And I'm always so excited when somebody lets me talk about something that's researched or evidence-based. And what that means is
Mm-hmm.
it's just not my crazy idea. There are
Right.
some things I do that if I told you, you would think I was stone cold crazy, but they actually work, right? But I
Right.
actually haven't gone to the trouble of doing a clinical trial to prove that it works. But with the
Right.
mindfulness, the trials are in, the research is clear. When we help children, or the grown-up children, learn how to be
Right.
mindful and to be a witness
Mm-hmm.
to their own process, and then to notice it. And then this is where the metacognition is. You kind of step back from your own mindfulness and observe it, and then eventually start to take control of your own thinking self. So you are the driver of your thinking self. it has a profound impact on all areas of your life. And so whether you're talking relationships, romance for adults, if you're talking the workplace or raising kids, or if you're a child, if you're talking about following instructions, listening to your parents, getting along with peers and siblings, doing well in school, teaching mindfulness and metacognition is simply one of the fast track ways that I get people to make progress quickly. And that's it.
I love that.
And I wish I could get paid money for telling people that, because I think a lot of people would get healed from hearing it, but it's just that simple.
Right now, so, we're going to dive into this a little deeper, because there's some people, I am a witness for the whole thing about mindfulness and how it really can just liberate you, because you understand your own a power within, so to speak. But for somebody who hears about mindfulness, because like you said, it's very popular, there's a lot of studies. So just in layman's terms, what does that actually mean, and how do they get started with that?
Sure. So I first want to caution people on all of these things that you see being sold. They try to sell software programs and apps, and they might help you a little bit, but you don't need any of that stuff. Your body, your mind, your heart, the people you love, these are the things that you can use to work through these processes. Mindfulness is, and there's this saying, and I think that it speaks to it. Are we all adults here? Are we all adults here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is from a Shaolin monk, but whatever the case, this is a beautiful story. What do you do? What do you do when a tiger has chased you and you've jumped off the edge of a cliff and you're about to fall thousands of feet into a ravine, and the root that you're holding on to is starting to give way? What do you do? What's the answer?
Breathe and brace yourself.
Good. And the way the story goes, the answer is looking and noticing the little wildflower growing out of the edge of the cliff. Bringing yourself into the moment, finding something beautiful or worthwhile noticing, and then, just as you said, breathing. Now, obviously that's a story, and clearly if you were being chased by a tiger and falling off a cliff, I'd hope you could do something in addition to noticing the pretty flower. But the reality is that when we get reactive, a couple things happen. When we get reactive, first of all, the non-dominant portion of our brain starts to shut down. So we're working with about half a brain. And then as we get more reactive, our thinking part, our prefrontal cortex right up here, starts to go through neurological downshifting. And that means there's less blood flow, less activity, less electrical activity. So we lose the ability to really be in charge of our thinking, rational selves. So with mindfulness, we just stop and we go, oh, I just noticed that I had a big bad thought. And we can be a witness to the fact that we had a big bad thought, but we can choose to just let it flow like a bubble, like you just blew a big bubble. You know, with those little bubble wands, you blew the big bubble. Whoops, I just blew a big one, and there it goes. And then as we progress, we could even do things like pop the bubble. I teach children how to do techniques like imagining that their big bad thoughts are just big bubbles that they pop. Or, and I have a child, I have custody of a child who has a trauma history. This is the one he loves. He imagines that there's a candle with a flame in his mind. And every time there's a thought that is intrusive, he brings it over to the flame and it goes poof, like fireworks. Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
So the first step is interrupting our habit of having intrusive and non-productive thoughts. That's step number one. And it begins by stepping back and noticing that we're having them, and then choosing to let them leave us. The next step is when we get more skilled at this, we can then start to choose to use our mind to create more effective and happy thoughts. And that's exactly what you were talking about. And you can do this section because you have this down pat. How does one? How do you bring forth those happy and effective thoughts? How do you do it?
Yeah. Well, for me, there are times where I use a lot of outside visualization. So, like, for example, I have this candle holder that says love.
Oh, that's
So I
beautiful.
might have a coffee cup that says be awesome. Because a lot of times, you have things going on with yourself and you got to be reminded with visual cues. So
Yes.
those things kind of help me on my mission. It's just like a reminder that, hey, I'm going to be happy. I choose to be happy. And it reminds me that I have to work at it. It's just not going to happen and fall in my lap. I have to be proactive about doing it.
Good. And so that's a really
Hmm.
good point. You just talked about physical objects. We can use sensory
Hmm.
input to help stimulate those happy thoughts. So the visual cue for you of seeing that candle holder with love on it and that pretty, rainbow of colors, that's a visual
Hmm.
cue. For some children, we use aromatherapy because they can put on a lotion or
Okay.
we mix up an aromatherapy oil, and then that smell helps remind them. Other people, it's
Hmm.
texture. They may have a squishy thing in their pocket to calm them down, or we might get them a fuzzy, like a scarf, and they can just pet that. Um, there are even
I
these little
love that.
chew things that we put around some of the children's neck. They're made of silicone so that they won't break down and it's not a choking hazard. And in schools where they
Oh.
don't allow them to wear it around their neck, we put it on like a pacifier clip and I just clip it to their shirt. And then they can be chewing on it.
Oh.
So people can use sensory input, smelling, feeling, whatever, the sounds to help induce them into a more calm and focused state and remind them to have happy thoughts. So that's really cool.
I love that. Yeah. Now, so you brought up the first thing about, kind of interrupting that habit of negative thinking. And so a lot of this, I know just in my own life, it happened where you're so overwhelmed, you just let everything happen in your head. You know what I mean? You don't
Yes.
really take stock that this is this and I need to, get a handle on this. So if somebody's watching and they're in overwhelm, so they recognize that some of these things may not be good, but what do you recommend them to do first to
Right.
kind of get that habit or diagnose it from there?
So one of the things that I want to mention is if anyone is in that state, and if they go to our website, orchardhumanservices.org, there's a self-help
Hmm.
guide and it's for free. They can
Okay.
download it. I actually wrote it for a
Okay.
dear client who was exactly in that state. She was in a very
Okay.
fragile state, and I knew I wasn't going to be available to her. And as much as I love my clients, I don't live with them. Although a little girl the
Right.
other day, she was like, "Where are you going to sleep?" She didn't want me leaving. "Where are you going to sleep? Dr. Darlene, where are you going to sleep?" But I don't live with them. And so I had a
Right.
client who was just on the brink of a very fragile thing happening to her. And so I wrote
Hmm.
this guide and sent it to her. And I said, "Here's what you do." So the instructions are actually written down with some resources
Okay.
and links to,
I love that.
yeah,
Okay.
to some supportive things. And we have other things like that on Amazon. There's a self-harming guide and a couple things like that, because when people are in a crisis, they actually just need something to walk them through. So somebody,
I
the
love it.
first thing they really need to do is to just check, am I safe? Because if they're not safe, they can always pick up the phone and dial 911. Or if anyone is in the state of Georgia, there's something called the Georgia Crisis and Access Hotline.
Hmm.
If they feel that they're safe, then the thing to do is to just stop and notice. If somebody is
Hmm.
really freaking out, sometimes the first thing to do is stop and notice where the freak out is happening. How are they
Right.
experiencing it? Is there
Hmm.
pressure in their head? Do they feel like their head is spinning? Is their heart racing? Is there tightness in the
Right.
chest? Are they feeling it in their tummy? Some people actually like want to throw up or have irritable bowel syndrome. I mean, it can trigger, stress can trigger so many different things in the body. So if somebody is really in
Right.
that much of a state of dysregulation, they have to just stop and notice and see, where is it happening in my body? And sometimes
Hmm.
when they're really in a crisis state, all we can do is ask them to do that for 10 or 15 seconds and ask them to come back and do that every 5 or 10 minutes. And then the next step
Wow.
is, after they've done that, maybe the next day they can say, "Okay, I'm going to notice where I'm feeling it. And now I'm going to just notice the thoughts that are going along with it." And then by about the third or fourth
Right.
day, we can
Okay.
start to say, "Okay, I see where I felt it in my body. Now I see where the thoughts
Mhm.
are. Now I'm going to think, can I observe the thoughts and start to push them away from me?" And then we little by little move them up. And honestly, I have some clients who are so fragile that I ask them to do it for 10 or 15 seconds at a time to start. Because if somebody is in a stress mode like that, if you tell them to put on the timer and close their eyes and try to calm down for 2 minutes, they'll think it's over in 5 seconds. They literally are in such a warped state of time-space reality that they feel like 2 minutes is an eternity. So we always recommend starting with little tiny bites. And so if you can imagine, I do that with children and adults, it doesn't matter.
That's good.
In some cases, some adults actually have some experience with prayer, mindfulness, meditation. And so if they already were practicing it, they might start off with 5 or 10 minutes or 20 minutes. But for most people who are in a deep state of stress, it's baby steps in the beginning.
I love that, you know, and that gives people something realistic to think about, because you don't recognize time. One, you're probably not sleeping well, you're not eating right. I mean, all the things that I had to overcome with that. So that is so true. Now, so we got the mindfulness, and you were saying something about the noticing the time where we could observe and choose.
Right.
So getting to that point, what do we do about that?
So after a person is able to sit and just be aware that they're feeling anxiety or stress or some unpleasant feelings, notice where they are in the body, and notice that there's probably a thought or a fear or an anxiety that they can imagine. The next step would be to say, okay, I am not that. If you're afraid of a dog next door that bit the neighbor, and that's what you're afraid of, we need to separate and say, I am not that. That is a thought.
I love it.
And so we separate.
I love that.
I am not that. And then when we can push it away from ourselves and have a little distance, and we see that it is a thought, it is not my identity, it is not who I am. That is so critical. The minute we can get children to separate and realize that's a thought, that's not me, then we can start to teach these amazing techniques. Then we can play. And sometimes there's a funny one that we do. I'll actually put rubber ducks in a bucket of water, right? And I'll write a word or two about each upsetting thought that a child has. And then I give them a water gun, and they get to shoot the little duck and get it to go to the other side of the little pool, right? We do that in real life so that the child then can imagine doing that in their head with their thoughts, because they realize I'm not that thought. That being scared of the dog, that's not who I am. That's a thought that I had. And in my mind, I can shoot that thought with a little gun. Or some people like to see it as a bubble and pop it. Some people like to see it turn into a dove and fly away, or a butterfly and fly away. Or like that one child I told you about, he likes to see a candle in his mind and bring the unsupportive thought and just bring it into the candle, and it poofs away. So we call it poofing thoughts. Poofing thoughts.
I love that. And I love the thing of now. So you brought up the good point about separating the thought from your identity. That is just profound. And I battle with that. You know, it's like, oh, I got to be the best officer wife, the best mom, or the best first lady. So how does somebody begin that separation process? You know, what are some things? Should they have a routine that they do on a regular basis? Or, you know, what would you recommend if somebody's at that point?
You know, I can tell that you're a mom of 15 children because you are right on point with it. Absolutely. A routine can be very helpful. Sometimes the unexpected things that come up every day can really set us off. Like right before I got online with you, you know, we had a conversation. I don't know how many computer web appointments I've had this week. And I use all the different programs, and I couldn't get it through my head. But you wanted to be on Facebook with me on my phone, and I'm sitting here on my computer, so I'm thinking, but what's the phone got to do with? Like, what do you want me to do with the phone? And then I finally got it. Oh my goodness, I'm not using my computer. I'm using the phone as the computer to run a Facebook app. Like, okay, got that one, right? Life sometimes
love the transparency. You see what I'm saying? I love this. Yeah. This is good.
Life is a little overwhelming sometimes, right? So imagine if I had a routine where every time I have a video chat with somebody, I have a little basket where I have, among other things, the earbuds and the power cords, and by all means, the little tripod. Now, it turns out my son works for Amazon, and I ran upstairs to his room and I said, son, I need a tripod. So I'm using, I wish I could show you this little thing I'm using. It's this little, I don't know what it is. It's a little triangle, and I prop my phone up against it, but it's not my tripod.
Right.
So see how much easier this whole
you.
experience would have been. It would have been an amazing experience. So with the same thing, when we're living our lives, we can always prepare for anything, and we can make ourselves more set and more focused by having a routine and having all the tools necessary, no matter where we are or when we are. And so some ways that people can have routines would be putting a sticky note. Now, you did it better than a sticky note. You have that love thing. Can you hold it up again? It was so pretty.
Sure.
Candle holder, right? You don't need a sticky holder. You look at that beautiful thing. It looks like, you know, colors of the rainbow, and it reminds you of something. Some people use sticky notes. Some people actually put tattoos, or they'll put on a piece of jewelry to remind them. We can have a little notepad in our pocket, or a piece of paper in our pocket with a pen, so we can jot things down. Or perhaps we saw something inspiring on one of your posts, and we write them on a piece of paper and we keep them in our pocket, right? And then if we get upset, we pull it out, like, whoa, I have to remember, you know, that today I'm focusing on beauty, or today I'm focusing on simplicity. There are so many ways we can create a schedule and a routine. And then waking up at the same time, going to sleep at the same time, exercising and eating at the same time. The body actually really likes routine. Did you know that the body produces insulin in anticipation of a meal based on what times and how much the person ate over the last few days?
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
So even our blood sugar metabolism depends on scheduling, which as a mom, I know you know that. So if a person decides to stay up late one night and eat a bunch of junk food, they're going to mess up their metabolism for the next few days. And you know what? When you have low blood sugar, guess what the body does? It creates stress hormones when you have low blood sugar. And so by getting out of our routine and not being consistent, we actually simply cause ourselves stress and distress.
I love that. Okay. Now, so one of the questions that just came to my mind was, you know, we have these issues for people that have trauma, you know, about the mindfulness, but what about the person who is just needing to get the courage to start that business, overcome that fear? You know, it's just like these thoughts are coming, you know, what do you say to that person who wants to go that next level in their life or self-improvement, and they're just nervous about that? What do they do? What kind of routine?
I have a hunch, and it's just my inner gut, that if somebody was a little scared to go to the next level, it's because thinking about that thing that caused them trauma is so painful that they can't face it. So for that person, I would say, call me, call your mom if she's supportive, call your pastor or your rabbi if they're supportive.
I love
you know, go to a support meeting, a 12-step meeting, find a trauma or survivors meeting that matches up for your circumstances. Find somebody whom you really trust, who will really have your back when you feel those bad feelings and will help you realize. And I'm going to say something. I want to be clear. We're with adults, right? We're all adults here.
Right.
So what I would say, when you have those memories and those bad feelings, you're not going to die. You're going to be okay. You're just going to notice that you have really bad feelings in your body, and it's safe for you to notice where they are and what the thoughts are behind them. And it's safe for you to say, I am not that.
I love that. I love that.
And
I love that. That is just
I think
awesome.
that's when someone can be a personal witness to someone else's pain. You know, sometimes I help people, and I have to tell you, I don't think I did a darn bit of therapy with them. All I did was sit there and love them and be
Mm-hmm.
a personal witness. And sometimes that's all people need. They needed a safe person to hear them tell their
Right.
story,
Mm-hmm.
re-experience the pain, and then come up to some new conclusions about how they're going to respond to it.
I love
And
that.
that takes
Yeah.
more heart
That
than training and education.
yeah, that is so true. Yeah. So
Now, you are
that's some
definitely
good.
somebody I would call. If I was having a minute and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm in distress, I need help, you're exactly the kind of person I would call. Exactly somebody like you.
Thank you. Thank you. I so appreciate that. And we just met. I just love that, you
Well,
know?
life is
I
a
mean,
box
and
of
that's what I was
chocolates,
saying.
and so is LinkedIn.
Hey, I am telling you, and that's one of the things that is just so beautiful to hear because that's what I try to put out for people, for them to see that and receive it. So it's just such a confirmation for me that, we just meeting for the first time and you notice that. So that's awesome. So, and I definitely would call you because you definitely know what you're doing. I mean, I'm writing these notes and I'm like, this is so spot on. That's so true. So, let's see, anything else that you want to share with the audience in
Well, I
terms
do think
of,
there's just to follow up with the metacognition. Um,
okay,
when we're practicing metacognition, it's beyond our thinking. So we're not caught up in our thinking, but we're taking control of our thinking. And
okay,
I think people are probably familiar with the term executive function. So it's almost like there's an executive inside of us who's making decisions and planning our schedule. And like
okay,
my my executive inside, my executive function was high gear the day I picked you when I went into that box of chocolates and I went into LinkedIn and I found you, right? I did a really good job that day.
right,
So when
okay,
we start to build those skills and enable those skills and allow them to take care of us, rather than being victims to
mm-hmm,
our own poor thinking, we really start to change the
mm-hmm,
landscape and the architecture of our lives. And so it's a very
mm-hmm,
purposeful thing where you start with mindfulness, but then you go to the next step. So now not only are you not connected to your unsupportive thoughts, not only are you separating them and pushing them away, but now you're deciding, I am going to be the architect of the next thought. And I'm going to pick the one that I want. And here's how I'm going to do it. And that's when you say,
mm-hmm,
you're in the store, right? So maybe you were in this
mm-hmm,
amazing design store and you said, I see that candle holder with love and all those pretty colors. And I think that if I had that in my space, every time I saw it, it would remind me to take out that moment and notice the beauty. Like the monk hanging off the side of the cliff, hanging onto that root. Oh, there's a beautiful flower. There's something special I can do with that moment that would otherwise have been spent suffering. So getting to the
yes,
next beefy moment where you start driving that bus of your own thinking, that's where metacognition comes in. And when we teach children with special needs how to practice metacognition, or here's what's really interesting, when you look at various mental illnesses, they are
mm-hmm,
very commonly associated with a lack of ability to be mindful, to practice metacognition, to
right,
practice executive function and planning. So when we teach these skills to
mm-hmm,
people, it doesn't matter what their problem is, they're going to improve.
mm-hmm,
They might not completely recover
right,
in the way that maybe their mamas would hope for them, but we always can improve their
right,
circumstances. So I would just encourage everybody
that's,
to figure out how to take control and drive that bus of their own thinking so that next time a thought comes in, it's one that we picked, like, I'm going to buy a big bag of dog chow for that dog next door and I'm making friends with it. And then we resolve all of our
right.
stuff, then we transmute it into love, and then we all have a good time.
I love that. Now, so, this executive functioning, that's a good process. And how do you balance that when, we have been conditioned a lot in school for the kids to kind of conform? So it's like, how do you, what's the word? What are some routines that you could do to build up that muscle when every day they're taught repetition and the best way to teach a group and everybody conforming to get this done? So how do
Okay.
you build that muscle at the same
So
time?
let me ask you, are we ready for a really authentic answer to this?
Yes.
Okay, so here's a really authentic answer. I have some
Okay.
amazing friends who are teachers and administrators, and I myself am a certified teacher. but I homeschooled my children all the way throughout, and they all went to college. One of my daughters is in grad school getting one of the masters in clinical mental health counseling. That was my second master's. The thing is, when children go to school, the agenda these days is for the school to perform and to produce numbers. They're there to produce numbers. The numbers come in the form of the metrics that are the test scores and attendance and things like that, and the poverty scores and how many children have what type of disorder, and is it a mild, moderate, or profound disability. And then based on all those numbers, they get a paycheck, and then they get to pay everybody. Unfortunately, that is what drives schools, because if they don't do those metrics, they don't get the money. And I'm sorry, but as wonderful as most of the teachers are, most of them just don't have the capacity to show up and teach for nothing. And the power company ain't gonna play that game, and neither is the water company, and it becomes a problem. So what we recommend is that parents have frank conversations with the teachers and administration, and make sure that in the course of the day, every child has a moment of quiet, and every child who requests it has access to a quiet space when they need it. Because the worst thing to do to a child is have them be in a state of trauma. Did their dog die that day? Did their grandpa have a heart attack? Did the neighbor punch them in the stomach? Did somebody steal lunch? Are they hungry? To have them in a state of trauma and suffering, and then to have to sit there in class and get yelled at and maybe bullied or ridiculed. So when a child self-identifies as, I need a little space right now, there needs to be a clear routine for how we can allow these children access. There is a principal, there's a counselor, there are aides in the principal's office, there are places where children can go and have a few moments of quiet. And so I
love that.
I really stress that for any child that I work with, we make that part of the routine. And if the child has more than a small amount of anxiety or stress, we put together what I call power packs. So I will go to the school and I fight for my children. I go to these IEP meetings and these Section 504 meetings, and we have the parents put together these little power packs with calming aids, or like maybe drawing tools or little tiny Legos, so that if the child is in a state of distress, they can grab their power pack and go sit in a quiet corner, go to the nurse, go to the counselor, go to the principal's office, sit in a corner and do something quiet and self-calm. And by doing that, we are not forcing children to be in one perpetual state of stress and anxiety after another. But the reality is, for a lot of children, especially children who have things like deep poverty, learning disabilities, dyslexia, ADD, visual problems, any type of handicap, children in communities where there's a great deal of bullying or gang activity, or where some children are just plain mean and cold, or they're nasty teachers. There are schools with a lot of nasty teachers. Sometimes rough principals hire teachers that aren't so nice. And then you have other schools where the teachers are like angels and you just want to take them all home. So I think what the children need a break, and they need to be able to calm down, because if they can't calm down and stop all that chatter, and they're always responding to outside cues, they will never truly be able to gain control. And I don't want to go off target, but you know, I take care of some really fragile children, and there are some children who are suicidal. And we're all still adults here, right? There are only adults here, is that right? Okay, so
yes.
I remember talking with school administration about a child who was suicidal. She'd been released into my care from a mental health facility. And here, my whole professional identity is on the line. My biggest concern was keeping her safe, but in addition to that, my professional identity was on the line. So she was sneaking out of the classroom and cutting herself in the bathroom because children were bullying her, and the teachers were not able to mediate that and get people to be appropriate. So I went to the meeting. I said, hey guys, we have a problem. Oh, well, there's nothing we can do if she sneaks out. And I said, well, we need to calm down and create some quiet space. And I explained what we needed to do. And they said, oh no, we can't do that, because we have to keep her on the reading, for the trajectory for reading, because those reading scores are so important. And I said, well, you know, dead children can't read, and that would really mess up your statistics too. So how about we keep her alive, get her healthy, and then you can work on teaching her how to read. And so
I
having a
love that.
series of those experiences is what caused me to write the book, Dead Children Can't Read, Classrooms of Compassion. Because too many
I love
times
that.
I have been in an IE meeting and sat there, IEP meeting, and sat there with the administrators and teachers where they're insisting, must read, must do math. And I know this is a child who just had a major trauma, who may be suicidal, self-harming, fragile, mentally fragile, could go off the deep end at any moment and maybe need to be institutionalized. We need to give those children,
Right.
and the school has to have a mechanism for responding to that, because they are, after all, they're not statistics or metrics or test scores. They are little children, they're humans, and there are babies. So
I love that. Yeah, because I asked that question because we had two children in our district who committed suicide last school year. So I think one of them was maybe a middle schooler and one was a high school. So the question is, you have the counselors, and a lot of kids look to the counselors for academic help, but
right.
they don't even know how to verbalize what it is they need mentally and emotionally. So what are some things that, with me being on the school council, that we can kind of implement, like life skills or some kind of mindset strategy that
Sure.
we can incorporate for these students? What would you suggest?
So here's what I think about that. First of all,
Okay.
in the state of Georgia, parents are responsible for their children's mental health, not schools.
Okay.
I want to say that again because people really need to be clear about this. In the state of Georgia, parents are responsible for their children's mental health, not schools. So
Okay.
although a school counselor might be allowed to talk to a child who is grieving a loss or going through some major trauma or problem, most of the time they're just there to talk to them about academics. So
Right.
I have walked in a school where a child was beating his head with his fists, and I knew the school was not responding. We had put a very careful Section 504 plan in place, so they knew that the minute this child became dysregulated, I had the power packs there. All they had to do is send this child to the office and calm them down. But the school said to me, oh, we know bad behavior when we see it, and they punished this child for having a mental health moment because this child was a survivor of severe abuse. And so when
Wow.
I got there, the child was still beating his head. It had been going
Mm-hmm.
on however long it took me to drive there. Can you guess how long
Wow.
it took me to calm that child down and stop beating his head?
Probably about 7 minutes, maybe.
20 seconds.
Wow.
So we have to be aware that the schools are not there to attend to our children's mental health status.
Wow.
We get a little bit of grace when the children are being served under an IEP. The IEP is the
Okay.
individualized education plan under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And if a child is lucky enough to qualify for that, then the school is required to evaluate that child's social and emotional development. So sometimes
Right.
if there are some signs of social and emotional developmental delay or missteps
Mm-hmm.
in the way they've developed in social emotional areas, you can get the school to buy in to doing some appropriate interventions and giving the child some space. But most of the time,
Okay.
parents need to be very aware and proactive
Mhm.
on behalf of their children's mental health. And I mentioned again
Right.
that, we have, our little books are 99 cents. We're not making money by selling these books. They're there as a service to the community. So we have like a
I love that.
socialization guide, and then we have a self-harming guide. So if a parent comes up on something like this and they need something to do, they can get this guide, and it basically talks you through what to do and how to find
I
resources.
love that.
So
Yeah.
parents really do need to reach out. That community organization that I mentioned, the Crisis and Access Line, the
Mm-hmm.
Georgia
Mm-hmm.
Department of Behavioral Health has actually equipped that organization to be able to even gift some families with a few appointments to get them started with a qualified mental health
Oh,
professional. And then that qualified
I
mental
love that.
health professional can possibly put together a plan to send over to the school. And God help us all, whether the school chooses to follow it or not, because many times, as I said,
Right.
the principal will look at me like this and say, well, I know how bad behavior looks. I know what it looks like. And, you're not going to pull the wool over my eyes. And I just look
Mm-hmm.
at them and go, well, you know what? I know where I went to get my clinical mental health training. Where did you get yours?
Right. Right. You're right. It's really, we have to advocate for these children, because if we don't speak up, who will?
Yep. Who
you
will
know?
speak out? And so it's our job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to do it loud,
Yeah.
and I try to do it with kindness in my heart, because I know the people who make these
Right.
mistakes are not doing it to be malicious. I know that one
Right.
principal who was letting that child beat his head, who said to me, "You just don't know bad behavior when you see it. I've been doing this for 25 years." And I'm thinking, I think I have a few more grandchildren than you do, ma'am. And you know, we
Right.
really have to tell the truth and hold people accountable. But in the meantime,
Yeah.
parents really just have to reach out to mental health support. It's there. The
I love
community
that.
has community mental health. There are individual counselors, nonprofits like mine. And even if somebody can't afford services, we have a sliding scale. So many places have a sliding scale. And then on top of that,
Mm-hmm.
is free or low cost resources that parents can get their hands on to help them work through some of the challenges that they have. So there's a lot of help
I
out there.
love that.
Parents have to be very proactive.
I love that. Yeah, that is good. Well, we have definitely enjoyed you today. This has just been so informative. I love your passion and energy. It is just so, I could talk to you for hours.
Well, I
So
love yours
I
as
really
well.
appreciate you taking. Thank you. So, what are some? First of all, how do we get a hold of you? What's
Well,
the best way to get a hold of you?
My website, my organization is Orchard, like an apple orchard, Human Services. OrchardHumanServices.org is the website. And an easy email for me is just D for Darleen, just D at OrchardHumanServices.org. That's it.
Okay.
I guess I
All
have a
right.
phone number. It's
So, all right.
770-686-0894. That's if anybody's even out there listening to the phone number, but you know, we have one of those too. So.
I know that's right. Most people are, you know, it's just texting, email,
Right.
you know, that face-to-face stuff is kind of few and far between.
Exactly.
So any last parting words you want to say?
Well, I think people just need to take charge of their thinking selves and realize again that they are not the experiences and they are not the thoughts that are moving through them. They are simply the pure consciousness that created the universe expressing in human form. And they just need to get jiggy with it and learn how to separate from anxiety and stress and just be happy.
I love that. Well, you know, hey, that's a good place to stop. We really appreciate it. And again, I want to thank you again. I look forward to us having lunch next week.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I look forward to it too. And thank you for the kind people who made kind comments in the beginning. I really do appreciate that.